I never considered myself a bad person. Sure, I made mistakes, who hasn't? But nothing could have prepared me for the nightmare that followed my biggest mistake of all. It started with a secret, a whisper of temptation that I let in. And in the end, it nearly cost me my sanity. I had been married to Julia for 5 years, and for the most part, we were happy. She was beautiful, kind, and patient in ways I probably didn't deserve. But routine has a way of dulling things, making you forget how lucky you are. That's when I met Sarah. She was younger, wilder, the kind of woman who made you feel alive again. It started as harmless flirting, or at least, that's what I told myself. But we both knew it wasn't going to stop there. One night, while Julia was out of town visiting her mother, I invited Sarah over. The air was thick with anticipation as we crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. It was thrilling, dangerous, and utterly foolish. But as soon as it was over, a strange sensation settled in my gut. It was guilt, yes, but something more, something I couldn't quite explain. Like being watched. As Sarah left, I locked the door and turned off the lights, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. The house felt different, heavier, as if the walls had absorbed my betrayal and were holding it against me. I chalked it up to paranoia and went to bed, forcing myself to sleep. That's when the nightmares started. I woke up to the sound of whispering. At first, I thought it was just the wind slipping through the cracks of the old house. But then I heard my name. A woman's voice, soft yet unmistakable, whispering from the corner of the room. Liam. My blood turned to ice. I sat up so fast my head spun, my eyes darting around in the dark. But I was alone, or so I thought. A shadow moved near the closet, just a flicker, gone too fast to be real. My heart pounded as I fumbled for the lamp, but the bulb flickered and died the moment I turned it on. Then, the bed dipped, as if someone had just climbed onto it. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the headboard, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The air turned freezing, my breath visible in the dim light from the window. And then, I felt it, a hand, ice-cold, sliding over my ankle. I screamed and kicked wildly, falling out of bed in a heap. The moment I hit the floor, the presence vanished. But the fear stayed, wrapping itself around my ribs like a vice. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been a dream. Stress, guilt, those things could play tricks on your mind. But then I saw the bruises. Dark finger-shaped marks wrapped around my ankle, proof that something had touched me in the night. Over the next few days, things escalated. The whispers became more frequent, the shadows darker, more defined. Objects moved on their own, keys disappearing, chairs scraping across the floor when no one was in the room. Julia came home, and I prayed it would stop. That maybe, whatever it was, had been tied to my guilt, and with her presence, it would fade. But it didn't. In fact, it got worse. Julia started waking up with scratches on her arms, deep and red as if something had raked its nails down her skin. She blamed it on the cat, but I knew better. The cat had died 2 years ago. Then, one night, I woke up to find Julia sitting up in bed, her back stiff, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her breathing was slow and ragged, like someone forcing air through shattered lungs. Julia? I whispered, my voice barely audible. She turned to me, but it wasn't her. Her eyes were pitch black, her lips curled into a smile that didn't belong to her. And when she spoke, it was in that same whispering voice from my nightmares. You let her in. My blood ran cold. I reached for her, but the moment I did, she let out a guttural scream, her body convulsing before collapsing back onto the bed. When she woke up moments later, she had no memory of what had just happened. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her we needed to leave, that the house was no longer safe. I booked a hotel, packed a bag, and was ready to walk out the door when I heard it. Laughter. Low, cruel, and right behind me. The last thing I remember before blacking out was a pair of ice-cold hands wrapping around my throat. I woke up in the hospital, my throat bruised, my voice barely more than a whisper. The doctor said I had a seizure, but I knew better. Something had punished me for my betrayal, something ancient and angry. And it wasn't done with me yet. Julia left me shortly after. She said she couldn't handle my paranoia, my unraveling mind. I didn't blame her. I wouldn't have stayed either. Now, I live alone. And every night, just as I close my eyes, I hear it again. A whisper from the dark. You let her in. But it didn't stop there. One evening, as I sat in my dimly lit apartment, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the silence. My breath hitched. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hesitant, I approached the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there. Another knock, this time from behind me. Spinning around, I saw my bedroom door creak open on its own. The air grew heavy, suffocating. Shadows slithered along the walls, stretching, writhing. Then, from the darkness of the room, two gleaming eyes appeared, voids of absolute blackness staring directly at me. I bolted for the door, yanking it open, desperate to escape. But the hallway was wrong. It stretched on infinitely, its walls pulsing like a living thing. My own heartbeat pounded in my ears as the whispering began again, more voices this time, overlapping, growing louder. You let her in. Cold fingers curled around my wrist, dragging me back. I screamed, struggling, but the unseen force was relentless. My vision swam, the world distorting into a swirling abyss. And then, darkness. I awoke in my apartment, disoriented, drenched in sweat. The clock read 3:33 a.m. My wrist throbbed. Looking down, I saw the unmistakable imprint of fingers burned into my skin. I am never alone. She is always here. Watching. Waiting. And she will never let me go. I never slept anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt her there, just beyond the veil of sleep, waiting. Watching. My apartment had become a prison, and night after night, I endured the same torment, the whispering, the shifting shadows, the sensation of icy hands brushing against my skin. But then, things got worse. One evening, as I sat on the couch staring blankly at the television, the screen flickered, distorting into static. A sharp, high-pitched noise filled the room, like the shriek of metal against metal. I fumbled for the remote, pressing buttons at random, but the screen remained frozen in its ghastly, white noise haze. Then, through the distortion, an image emerged. At first, it was nothing but shadows, moving unnaturally, limbs twisting, stretching. Then, a face, a pale, hollow-eyed visage, pressed against the screen from the inside, its mouth opening far too wide. The whispering returned, merging with the static. You let her in. I scrambled backward, knocking over the coffee table. The television shut off on its own, plunging the room into silence. But the reflection on the blackened screen, oh God, the reflection, showed something behind me. Slowly, I turned. Nothing. But the air had changed. It was thick, oppressive, pressing against my lungs. Then, a slow, deliberate knock at my door. My pulse thundered in my ears. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. The knocking came again, louder this time. Then again, insistent, angry. I edged toward the door, pressing my eye against the peephole. My breath caught in my throat. The hallway outside stretched into darkness, longer than it should have been, the walls twisting, the ceiling pressing down. And in the distance, a figure stood motionless, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. The knocking stopped. Silence. But I could still feel it there. Then, without warning, the door handle turned violently. I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall as I watched, helpless, as the knob rattled, twisted, yanked by some unseen force. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to move. A whisper, this time right against my ear. "You let me in." I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I turned back, the door was wide open. Beyond it, my apartment hallway was gone. Instead, an endless corridor of doors stretched before me, each one slightly ajar, the spaces between them thick with a writhing, black fog. A breath of cold air brushed against my neck. Then, hands. Gripping, clawing, pulling. I was yanked forward into the corridor, my scream swallowed by the abyss as the door slammed shut behind me. I fell. Fell for what felt like eternity, through darkness that was not empty, but full of voices, whispering, weeping, screaming. And then, I landed. I was in my apartment. Or at least, it looked like my apartment. But something was wrong. The walls pulsed as if they were alive. The windows were bricked over, blocking out any light. The air smelled of rot and something metallic, blood. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, but the screen was shattered, the time stuck at 3:33 a.m. Then, the whispers returned, but this time, they were coming from inside the walls. Scratching sounds followed, something clawing its way closer. The whispers grew frantic, overlapping, a chorus of tormented voices. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear them. And then, she stepped out from the shadows. Sarah. But it wasn't her. Not really. Her eyes were hollow voids, her skin gray and stretched too tight over her bones. Her mouth curled into that awful, knowing smile. She took a step forward, her movements jerky, unnatural, her neck twisting as if something inside her was broken. "Liam," she crooned, her voice layered with too many others. "You can't run." I stumbled backward, but the room shifted with me, stretching, warping. I reached the door and yanked it open, only to find myself staring into another version of my apartment, identical, yet wrong. A flickering light bulb buzzed overhead. The smell of decay was stronger now. And then, the sound of something wet dragging across the floor. I turned, my breath catching. The shadows in the corner of the room moved, coalescing into something that crawled toward me, long, emaciated limbs, fingers too sharp, joints bending the wrong way. Its face was a blur of features shifting rapidly, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. I ran. Through door after door, each one leading me back to the same twisted version of my apartment. My screams echoed uselessly. There was no escape. No end. Only her voice, whispering, always whispering. "You let me in." And then. Darkness. I woke up in my bed, gasping, drenched in sweat. Morning light streamed through the window. A dream. Just a dream. I let out a shaky breath and sat up. My heart was still racing, but relief started to seep in. Until I saw my phone. 3:33 a.m. And then, from the doorway, a whisper. "You let me in." The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the closet door creaking open, revealing a pair of pitch-black eyes staring back at me. Days passed, but the whispers never stopped. Then came the children. It started with laughter outside my window, light, innocent, but wrong. Peering through the blinds, I saw them standing in the courtyard. 3 children. They were barefoot, their clothes tattered, their faces pale as if drained of color. But their eyes were black voids, hollow and knowing. One of them, a little girl with tangled hair, pointed at me. "I saw you," she whispered. Her voice carried, impossibly clear. "I saw what you did." My stomach turned to ice. Another child, a boy, took a step closer. "You let her in." I slammed the blinds shut, my breath ragged. When I dared to look again, they were gone. That night, I dreamt of them standing at the foot of my bed, their whispering voices merging with the shadows. And when I woke, My bedroom window was open, footprints trailing across the floor. Small. Bare. Wet. And in the darkness, their voices rose once more. "We saw you." The whispers never stopped. Days blurred together, each one more suffocating than the last. I barely ate. I barely moved. Sleep was a cruel trick, teasing me with the illusion of escape, only to drop me back into the nightmare. The children returned each night, their black eyes watching, their whispers seeping into my bones like a sickness. "We saw you. You let her in. She's inside you now." I stopped looking out the window. It didn't matter. They were always there. But the worst part came 3 nights ago, if time even meant anything anymore. I had barricaded my bedroom door, shoved the dresser against it, stacked anything I could find. It wouldn't help. I knew that. But desperation does strange things to a man. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of voices, overlapping, shrieking, pleading. Then, a sound that sent ice down my spine. A soft knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the wood. My breath caught. I pressed my hands against my ears. The knocking came again. Harder this time. Louder. The walls trembled. The whispers rose to an unbearable pitch, drilling into my skull. My vision blurred, black dots swimming before my eyes. And then. Silence. A silence so deep it felt like the world had been erased. I didn't dare move. I didn't dare breathe. The knob turned. Slow. Gentle. Deliberate. Then, a click. The dresser slid away from the door as if pulled by unseen hands. The barricade I had built with such panic now crumbled like dust. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. And from the void, she stepped forward. Sarah. No. Not Sarah. The thing that wore her shape, her face, her voice. Liam. My name was a whisper from her lips, a broken melody layered with too many voices. She moved in that awful, jerky way, like a puppet with severed strings. Her head tilted, her mouth stretching too wide into something that could never be called a smile. I pressed myself against the wall, my body refusing to obey my screams to run. Her eyes, bottomless, empty voids, locked onto mine. And then, she reached out. Cold fingers pressed against my face. "You let me in," she breathed. Pain. A searing, all-consuming agony that started in my chest and spread like fire. My skin burned, peeled, cracked. The room around me twisted, the walls bleeding, the ceiling stretching into an abyss. My screams became part of the chorus, my voice lost among the others. I was sinking, pulled into something deeper than the dark, something that had no end. And then. I woke up. Sunlight streamed through my window. Birds chirped outside. The scent of coffee lingered in the air. My room was intact. No blood. No whispers. No Sarah. A dream. Just a dream. I let out a shuddering breath and sat up, rubbing my eyes. My phone lay on the nightstand. The screen was cracked. The time read 3:33 a.m. The knock came from the closet this time. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat. The door creaked open, inch by inch, revealing the darkness inside. And then, she stepped out. Not Sarah. Not the children. But me. A twisted, hollow-eyed reflection of myself. Its lips curled into that awful, knowing smile. "You let me in." I opened my mouth to scream, but the hands were already pulling me under. Darkness swallowed me whole. This time, I would never wake up.